long story short, guys, what are we going to touch on today? Well, diabetes. There are a number of forms of diabetes, and it is a very, very big problem in the world today. So Dr. Bob has spent 3 decades educating people around nutrition. He's a clinical nutritionist, a chiropractor, a kinesiologist, an engineer, and I believe he's got a degree in nursing as well. So if you can imagine all that knowledge tied up into, life experience. Dr. Bob, I believe, is in his early 50s right now. I'm sure he could pass for mid 40s. He looked after himself so well, but he's a very generous gentleman who's very family oriented, very loving, very people caring, and wants to help people to really take action to go and live a better life. That's what it's all about, is getting the information that you need to go and live a better life and create the environment so that you flourish, not perish. All right. There's a wise old saying, it's not the quantity of your life, but it's the quality of your life. So let's help people have a more qualitative life. And of course, that will also include quantity. So I've been helping people for the last 15 years as a coach to move better through personal training, through functional movement, and more recently in the last few years, through animal flow, through moving on the ground, coming back to nature, getting back to how we started as babies when we learned to evolve. And that whole process fascinates me because of the benefits for the brain, the benefits for the body, the benefits for overall fitness, but looking at the function of the way things work. And Dr. Bob is a functional medical doctor, which means he looks for root cause, what is going on internally. Let's look at that. Let's cross the T's, dot all the I's, examine everything that we know we should examine, and then create a condition for that person to thrive. So Dr. Bob, I'm going to pass it over to you, sir. How are you doing today?
Eric, I'm epic. It's a beautiful day. Started out with my hour of power, a good morning of patience, actually 3 back-to-back Zoom and podcasts this afternoon, back for patients, and Ask the Doctor tonight. So we're on a mission. We're on a mission to make the world better. And so far, so good. Beautiful.
We absolutely are. And I'm delighted, honored, and privileged to be partnered with you in that mission. And looking forward to hearing more and more success stories over the next few months and years. So to kick off the call, Dr. Bob, how big of a problem today is diabetes for not just adults, but for children as well?
Well, it is the absolute most expensive problem in the entire sick care system. $1 in $7 is spent on diabetes. It's even more expensive than cancer. And as you mentioned, children are having huge problems with diabetes. And I'll turn the clock back 35 years ago. When I was in school, they used to define diabetes as 2 types. There was adult onset and there was juvenile onset. And now we've renamed them. What they call juvenile onset, they call type 1. There's an autoimmune attack that happens that kills the cells of the pancreas that make insulin. That is certainly destructive. And to date, we haven't been able to undo that. Then the adult onset was people had essentially habits that were so disruptive to their health and wellness that they burned out the ability of the pancreas to keep up with the demands of insulin, and sugar levels began to rise. That was adult onset. Now we even have a 3rd type. And so they call Alzheimer's a type 3 diabetes of the brain. And we're beginning to realize that the more that people disrupt their blood sugar, the brain is going to suffer a lot in a lot of people. Now, I'm wondering if we should make Zaf another co-host as well, so we have another arm going after the entries. So
I'll do that right now. Actually, I find you, Zaf. Bear with me, guys. Where are you, Zaf? Will the real Zaf Khan please stand up?
Hey, Mr. Eric. Yeah, it's the real.
There you are. I'm just looking for you to add you as a co-host. Oh, there you are.
Fine. Pete Cohen is unmuted as well.
You should be co-host there now, Zaf. Perfect. So just if you can mute anyone that's just unmute by accident or otherwise gets excited as we go through the call. So Dr. Bob, take it back to where you're at. So we're looking at juvenile diabetes. That's not something that you've seen you've seen reversed in your clinical practice or at all really in the last number of years in your career?
Well, so when the pancreas is destroyed, we have a problem. And there is one case in the medical literature, it goes back to 2011, and they weren't calling it a cure, they were calling it long-lasting remission of type 1 diabetes. So in theory, if there's some producing cells remaining, that's technically called the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans, well, these cells can reproduce and ultimately come back. And as long as you have one case of long-lasting remission, just like Roger Bannister proved, you get a new level, you break the 4-minute mile, others will do it, or Edmund Hillary conquering Everest, others will do it. So I'm looking forward to more and more and more people reversing type 1 diabetes. But for now, prevention definitely trumps cure, whether we're talking about type 1, type 2, or type 3 diabetes.
When you speak about prevention, it's something that kind of grates on me is when I see a lack of education given to young children, where you see them running around supermarkets, bouncing off the walls, screaming and roaring and being emotionally unstable, and banging on the trolley, telling mommy and daddy what they want in the trolley. And you look in that trolley and most of it's packaged dead food. How important do you think it is to help educate children through parents in that early journey? And how important is it for those developmental years?
Well, the developmental years are critical. And so, years ago, I taught a seminar on brain chemistry and addiction. And there's reasons that it's illegal to give alcohol to kids. There's reasons that it's illegal to sell cigarettes to kids because the developing brain is much more vulnerable to addiction. Now we pass forward, and it's well known that sugar is the global top addiction. And I've used a reference many times before. It turns out that in animal studies, 94% of rats prefer processed sugar to cocaine. And cocaine is certainly considered one of the most addictive substances of all time. So, on some level, it ought to be considered child abuse to give excessive amounts of processed sugar. So, with our own kids, we were very protective. And, ages 0 through 5, right from the time they're conceived, and I'll call that day one, mom was on a really good diet, and then all the way through. And our biggest challenge happened when the kids happened to start going to school. And then they started giving junk for snacks. And, then you could see that these kids that never had it before suddenly said, whoa, I like this, I want more. And very fortunately, we kept our home environment very clean. And what I tell people is you want to buy your willpower at the store. Stay around the periphery, get the produce, get the good, preferably organic chicken meats, free range eggs, things like that. When you feed your kids right, they have a much better start on life. And so I'm very happy to say that our children and grandchildren all have an absolutely fantastic start. The kids all maintained it. Great body composition, great blood chemistry, great health. And it starts at home. And we do need to educate the parents, though. And unfortunately, especially in the Western world, they call it the Western diet. It's been said that there's no consensus on what they believe is the best diet, but there is consensus on what they believe is the worst diet. And we call it the standard American diet, also known as SAD, or the modern American diet, also known as MAD. And it's both SAD and MAD, bad for the brain, bad for the body. And we lead the world in sickness. We have so much money spent on sick care. It's really a crime.
There's something like, was it $1.25 or 30 in the US spent for every medication that was purchased for $1, was it $1.25 or 30 spent on the side effects of those drugs. So obviously that's not the way forward. As my dad used to always say, the way forward. But it's not the way forward. It's the way backwards, or into destruction, really, because when you look back at the way that the soils as well are being rotated and not being treated with respect, it's almost like you feed the soils, or your lack of feeding of the soils, the lack of nutrients come back to you. And if you run out of nutrients, or you're lacking in nutrition to replete the depleted cells, as you commonly say, you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble.
The globe is, CIA.gov talked about rapid depletion of non-renewable mineral resources. And, I can look at the US, and we're a big country, but the amount of prime prime farmland that we have, there we go, tongue twister today for me, is less than the size of the state of Rhode Island. And so that's the stuff that has all that it needs to create healthy plants. So there's a 99.99% probability that plants are grown in deficient soil. The journal Advances in Therapy quite simply said, supplementation is advisable for everybody. And this plays into the blood sugar problem, because when people don't get the nutrients they need, they're always hungry. And then they keep eating, and then they become obese. And obesity is associated with type 2 diabetes. 90% of type 2 diabetics are overweight or obese. And it sets up that perfect storm for diabetes to occur. So, if we just talk about the big three, eating right, moving right, sleeping right, those are the things we need to do. And they really require a lot of attention, because our society is not moving us in the right direction with any of those.
Sure. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, anyway, that's more of a lifestyle occurring challenge, right? It's where, you over time, through poor habits or poor eating habits or poor lifestyle, that develops over time, right? It's not something you're born with, like juvenile diabetes. It's just, it comes out of having poor chemistry. Would I be right there?
Sure. And by the way, I'll tell you that they're not born with juvenile diabetes either. There's certain risk factors that are known to trigger it. Certain toxins will do it. Certain infections will do it. Certain foods are associated with, gluten, especially the genetically modified form, is associated with a lot more autoimmune disease, and even dairy. And dairy, at least in this part of the world, 80% of antibiotics are used in livestock. Antibiotic literally means anti against, bios, life. And those are found in the milk. Milk is allowed to contain residues of over 80 different antibiotics. So when we feed kids inappropriately, their body and brain don't develop properly. They develop in a sick way. And unfortunately, we've got a medical system that just, instead of promoting health, promotes symptom suppression through drugs. And lots of tangents we could take on that. But we've got a big enough problem. If we just address diabetes, we could save the world a lot of grief. That's for sure.
Well, what kind of money are we looking at with that, Dr. Bob, currently? A year, US alone, what kind of costs is that, or a burden on the government?
Let me pull up that number. So I actually have it. And the most recent number that I have, great, they don't give the units, $537 billion a year, or 53.7, just depends. I've got to look at the table. It just has it shortened to a number, at least 53.7 billion, and significantly more expensive than cancer. So you start looking at that. And by the way, we represent 4.4 here, 4.4% of the world population. Yet we use over 50% of the world's prescription drugs. A big portion of that cost is diabetes.
Wow. And what are we looking at mortality rates for that per year, Dr. Bob? Have you an idea in that ballpark?
Well, what the estimate is that it costs the globe more than 25 million life years every single year. So you take the number of diabetics, how much earlier they die, 25 million years of quality of life or total life loss, then you look at quality of life, far more significant than that.
And type 3, you mentioned, has been considered Alzheimer's, right, over the last 10 years or so?
They've defined that a number of decades ago, because when people have extreme insulin resistance of the brain, they develop proteins that actually choke off the neurons. It's called amyloid. And when you start looking at Alzheimer's, more than 90% of Alzheimer's patients for a long period of time are cared for by family members who are unpaid, and they ultimately give it up when they just can't do it anymore. And the Alzheimer's patients have a lot of challenges. It tends to be the point when they start what they call sundowning, wandering around at night, have their night and day clock fixed up, and often wandering around their neighborhood and putting themselves at risk in the middle of the night. That's when ultimately they get put into assisted living, which in this country is really quite expensive. So, we've got to, across the board, take better care of this issue.
It's funny, actually, you say assisted living. My grand was in that situation a few years back, and it wasn't a good situation at all. It was lack of assistance, and I know it's not easy as a job, but at the same time, it's like, how do these places, they're so expensive, but yet we see people sitting in a chair for prolonged periods of time, and they start to get really bent over and withered. It's very sad to kind of see that, and you wish, my gran actually had she had dementia as well. And I realized, I was just tracking back over a call I was on with Pete recently. And it made me think, wow, how destructive is sugar for the brain? And my gran was such a sweet tooth in her latter years that, her memory seemed fine. And, I noticed the more visits we were having, and there was biscuits and there was chocolates and little cakes and stuff. And I didn't really see her eating too much food. And I think that's a big problem for people as they get older. It's like, well, I'm getting older now, and to heck with it, I'll have the treat, but it's much more serious than that, and sugar is super destructive for the brain, right?
Oh, brain in every cell of the body, so there's an endocrinologist out of Southern California named Diana Schwartzbein, and she talks about the progression of diabetes. And she says the first thing that happens when you get too much carbohydrate is your body's going to release a lot more insulin. And the reason it does that, it doesn't want the sugar floating around the bloodstream because it damages proteins in the body. They form something called advanced glycosylated end products. When we break that word down, the acronym down, it's AGE, AGE. Sugar ages the body and brain very, very rapidly. So the first thing that rises is insulin. The second thing that rises is body fat. The third thing that rises is blood fat, elevated total cholesterol, decreased good cholesterol, increased bad cholesterol, increased triglycerides. The last thing that rises is sugar. And the reason is the body wants to buffer it and protect that any way that it possibly can. But ultimately, when it fails and sugar rises, the body and brain age very rapidly. And that's why we lose 25 million life years per year due to diabetes.
So, we met probably, I think for the first time, it was Lyon in France, Dr. Bob. And I was keen to meet you and Kelly and learn more about what this global mission was, because, we can bicker and moan and talk about what the problems are all we want. But at the end of the day, the people who get things done are the people who have solutions on the cards that can actually go, okay, here are practical tips, practical pieces of advice that you can actually apply in your life. And as I know as a coach, and as you know, having coached some of the best athletes on the face of the planet, but also normal people, we are creatures of habit. And sometimes those habits make you want to just bite down in your fist and go, well, why aren't you taking those actions? Because we're creatures of habit. So I was blown away that Reishi, which if we can kind of go down into now, is so powerful for the likes of sugar balancing and balancing hormones. Could you just share what some of the pathways are that Reishi helps directly with all of those kinds of diabetes, 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you start looking at type 1 diabetes, it's an autoimmune attack. So the medical literature says that Reishi can be used to treat and or prevent autoimmune disease. Now, prevent is going to be better in this case because we haven't yet figured out how to reverse it once the destruction is there. But there's a couple ways that they could induce type 1 diabetes in the animal model. One case, they would infect the pancreas with a virus that's pretty common called Epstein-Barr. And they did this on mice because they wouldn't do it on humans. But when they infected the mouse pancreas with Epstein-Barr, all the mice developed type 1 diabetes. Now, when they gave them Epstein-Barr infections and Reishi, none of the mice developed type 1 diabetes. Very, very easy to look at that under PubMed. There was also a study where they used a very powerful pancreatic toxin. That the abbreviation is STZ. It was previously used to treat pancreatic cancer, but they stopped using it because it would destroy the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. Again, researchers used Reishi along with STZ, and when they gave it, the individuals did not develop type 1 diabetes. So very powerful there in terms of preventing autoimmune disease. When it comes to type 2, it's generally said that there's 3 things that happen. 1, the pancreas burns out. 2, the liver actually starts making more sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis. And the tissues of the body become progressively insulin resistant. They ignore the insulin signal. So reishi, 1, is going to revitalize the cells of the pancreas. 2, it's going to modulate insulin release. 3, it actually works at the liver by the exact same mechanism as the top type 2 diabetic drug in the world called metformin. It modulates the liver enzyme called PEPCK. As metformin has multiple pages of bad side effects, reishi has hundreds of side benefits. And then finally, we look at insulin signaling and insulin response, and it's proven to enhance the body's response to insulin in all the tissues. Then finally, when we go to type 3, the most destructive protein in the brain is called amyloid. And when people have insulin resistance, this amyloid accumulates and doesn't break down. But reishi is known to dissolve amyloid and essentially keep the neurons healthier. So whether we're talking type 1, type 2, type 3, the major factors that set it up, reishi can prevent, or in some cases reverse, because we can reverse type 2. And there's now hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of type 3 being reversed, dementia being reversed.
Wow. You mentioned that word amyloid, and it takes me back to a call you did on concussions. Is it this? It's amyloid plaque is what builds during concussive repetition, right? Where the athletes who are dealing with constant blows, well, not just on the head, but the body, because the brain is literally like, I have that image of like a jellyfish in a jar of water. It's literally bouncing around inside of our cranium. It's the same amyloid that people suffer with concussion. Is that right, Dr. Bob?
Exactly. And if, the movie Concussion really brought that into light. And Mike Webster, he played 18 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers, won 4 Super Bowls, earned many, many millions. But when he died homeless under a bridge, and he didn't even know his own name. And when they did the autopsy, they were shocked at the amount of amyloid in the brain. And the medical pathologist literally said it was like concrete choking off the structures of the brain. Well, amyloid is what we call an inflammatory reactive protein. You get inflammation, you're going to lay down some amyloid. And if your body is able to dissolve it, and if you have good insulin signaling, you dissolve it more effectively, or if you take reishi, you dissolve it more effectively, then it doesn't have to choke off any of the structures. But if it accumulates, it can literally shrink the brain. And they showed Mike Webster's brain. Let's say it should normally be about this big. Well, his was shrunk down to a fraction of the size. And the area that was most damaged was the memory center, the hippocampus.
Right. So, guys, if you're seeing this information for the first time, you're wondering, what is reishi? Reishi is a medicinal mushroom. It's classed as the top superfood, or one of the top superfoods on earth. It is one of also the most alkaline-rich foods on the planet. And the more towards alkaline we are, the healthier we are, the closer to acid we are, the more sickly we are. And as I once heard before, disease cannot live in an alkaline body. So we need to be really flushing ourselves with alkaline-rich foods. And reishi is right up there on top of the mountain of nature's gifts to help heal our bodies and help bring us back to a state of balance. So we've just been really, really lucky to have found an amazing concept. We've taken the world's most nutritiously dense form of reishi and put it inside of what people want every day. And as I mentioned earlier, people are creatures of habit. It's hard to change people unless they want to change. It's impossible, actually, unless they want to change themselves. So we found it very advantageous to add this to people's habitual daily lifestyle without them having to change much, or if anything at all, really. So you mentioned reishi was, type 1, Dr. Bob, is linked to autoimmune. Do you have any data you could show from PubMed just on autoimmunity itself that you could maybe pop up for people who may be new to this info, where they could maybe do some recon, if they would, themselves for some of the PubMeds?
Sure. So let's go here, and I will share my screen. So this is pubmed.gov, and that's how you find it. You literally just type in your bar where you access your websites, pubmed.gov. And if I were to just type in autoimmune, let's just start with that. And you can see there's 228,000 medical studies on autoimmunity. And look at how they've gone up over the last decade. And as one of my mentors said, it's beyond alarming how many conditions seem to have an autoimmune component. And what we're taught very simply is that cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. The immune system doesn't hate your own body and try to kill it. The body becomes sick and the immune system is taking out the cells at a much greater rate. So the term that's often used in the medical literature, I think more than reishi, is Ganoderma. And I think there's probably a better way of putting it, but they're looking at 13 different studies on different things that have been studied in reference to reishi. And then I'm going to stop that share and I'm going to go to a couple of very specific slides in my presentation. So give me a moment here to find that, because I really like to teach what the immune system is designed to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Actually, one word that stood out to me, I always wondered, what does that word mean? Modulating. How powerful reishi is at modulating the immune system? Could you just explain what that means while you're opening your
Sure. Well, it balances it. So what we know is that our immune system is designed to protect us essentially from bad cells. So if there's a bad cell that comes in from the outside, like a parasite or a fungus or a bacteria or a virus, well, the immune system is supposed to kill that. If there's a bad cell that happens on the inside, like a cancer cell or a very sick cell that threatens the existence, we should kill that. And so ultimately, when our cells go bad, we do something where the analogy is weeding the garden. And so New England Journal of Medicine says that it's crucial to normal immune function to weed our garden. And then I take a look at, cells work on recognition. So the analogy I'll use with patients, I'll say, let's say you need a kidney transplant. And I'll say, I've got 2 and mine work really well. And, I like you, so I'll give you one of mine. And I might ask the question, well, how likely is it that my kidney will work in your body? And they'll say, well, if it's a good match, maybe it will. Well, here's what I can tell you. Even if it's a good match, medicine has to give anti-rejection drugs. Otherwise, your body will kill it. Your body recognizes that it's not your own, and therefore it goes after it. So if we were to do facial recognition and we were guarding a military base, well, if this guy shows up, we let him in. This guy is the same guy badly burned, and we probably wouldn't let him in. And so the medical literature says that cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. And if we're going to talk specifically, there's a TED Talk, and this pharmaceutical guy is saying, we should re-educate the immune system, because right now, when there's an abnormal cell of the pancreas that makes insulin, the immune system kills it. Well, I'm going to tell you that that's what it's designed to do. And when you start shutting down normal immune function, you create a lot of problems. So immunosuppression in the short term can kill you with a life-threatening infection, which sadly has happened to a lot of people treated medically. In the long run, if you do it too long, you can get cancer. But somewhere in there, I'm gonna have the statement that, there it is, Ganoderma, the medical literature says, can be used to treat and or prevent autoimmune disease.
Beautiful. So you've seen a lot of people come and go through your clinical practice over the last probably 30 years. How many people do you see with diabetes presenting as a challenge, and how effective has your protocols with reishi and other nutritional aids been to help rectify that?
Well, since it's the most expensive problem in our sick care system, we see a lot of it. And when people specifically are willing to change, right? And then, you've got to, if you keep doing what you keep doing, you'll keep getting what you got. I'll ask them, hey, do you want to get rid of this? And they often look at me confused. You mean we can make it go away? And I'll tell them, yeah, the average diabetic patient in my clinic is non-diabetic in 60 days. And so, we've got 30 years of doing that. We put them on a non-starch ketogenic diet. We put them on reishi, good fish oils, good exercise, buffer their stress, detoxify them where needed, control their inflammatory process. And this can go away. Even the most extreme cases of type 2 that I've seen, I'm thinking of one that it took a year to completely resolve it without medication. but it was well worth it to that individual because they were pretty miserable, having neuropathy set in and other things that they didn't like. And very fortunately, all of that resolved.
That's awesome. How great is that to be able to, to say that people come in, and I'm sure I've seen a lot of support groups over my time as well. And I see comments of people that they make in the groups, and it's almost, not to be blunt, but I don't see people providing solutions. I just see it almost like a community for people to collaborate on an unfortunate circumstance rather than create the solution. So, if I ever see people that put their hand up and say, I'm having a struggle, does anyone have experience in this? I'll most definitely be tagging them in a video of yours, Dr. Bob, and how effective you've been able to help people in your clinical practice. Because like I said, we're about solutions, not just feeding the problem, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I just mean that people can take ownership, they can change their chemistry, they can make lifestyle decisions to improve that situation. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And if you guys have anyone's on this call who does have a testimony around diabetes, we'd love to hear it. I know I have a testimony that was pre-recorded from a lady who couldn't make it on the call, unfortunately. I don't know if Tony's actually on this call as well. He had an incredible testimony with his challenge as well. And of course, guys, we can't make claims about, take our Reishi products and you're going to get X, Y, and Z. We can't do that. But we do have the world's top form of this superfood, and the data on PubMed is unanimous. So we just have to be careful. We can't overpromise. As you so eloquently put, Dr. Bob, people come into your practice, whether they're world-class Olympic athletes or people who have been sent home to die. I love what you say to them. I don't know if I can help you, but I'll give it a shot. And I love that, because under-promising and over-delivering is a great strategy in this life, because you'll surprise more people. And of course, you will get more referrals, and you know what? Good things come back around. So I love that approach. Cravings is an interesting one. Something I've often seen with clients, I get sugar cravings. Oftentimes that's linked to the person not having enough nutrients, so they reach for something that gives them that dopamine hit. Can you just touch on what Reishi can do for cravings in the body as well?
Sure. So you hit it a couple of different ways. So part of the reason that people have cravings or they're always hungry is their nutrient status is terrible. If your body needs nutrients, it will be hungry. That's a defense mechanism. You attempt to do it. So Reishi has all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water, and in doses that have positive impact on human health, even in what we give in a cup of coffee. But the neurotransmitter of craving, of addiction, is actually dopamine. And Reishi's proven to enhance dopamine along with serotonin, along with GABA, along with acetylcholine. So it can be good. Dopamine, understand, can be focus. It can be modulating addiction. It can be extreme joy. It can even be fine motor control. Serotonin's happy. Acetylcholine is memory, and GABA is calm. Eric, I just happened to glance at the questions, and Charlene asked, how do you deal with drop in blood sugar that they call relative hypoglycemia? And I'll tell you, this is very fascinating. We want ideal blood sugar. We use different units here in the States to be about 80. And I had a patient that was running a consistent blood sugar of over 700. Now, they didn't have to do that for very long before they were going to destroy so much of their body. So we put them on a very intense program. And when their blood sugar dropped to 600, they had all the symptoms of low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. And here's what I tell them. You know what? Sorry. What I've found over time is that the hardest thing that my patients go through is that hypoglycemic drop as their body is getting used to it. When they dropped to 500 from 600, they were hypoglycemic. To 400 from 500, they were hypoglycemic. So ultimately, it's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. We ultimately got this person down to 80 and consistently, but it was a big challenge for sure. Someone else asked, what benefits would Reishi have for my stepfather with late stage Alzheimer's? He's 68 years old. What I tell people is that whenever there's a problem with any organ system of the body, there are three distinct zones of cells. There are cells that are dead. There's nothing we can do about that. There's cells that are fine. There's nothing we need to do about that. But in between are cells that are functional but not functioning. And I'm looking for a picture of that. I should have that somewhere in my notes, and I'll share the screen. But here is Dr. Dale Bredesen, and about 8 years ago, I co-lectured with him at a major conference. We were both on the same docket. He wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's. It hadn't been published just yet, but they have hundreds of cases that they turn around. But let's just use this foot as if it were the brain. So that foot was scheduled to be amputated. They said, sorry, there's nothing we can say. We're going to cut the foot off right there. And the amputation was scheduled 2 days from the day that picture was taken. But look at the foot 2 weeks later, and then ultimately 17 months later. So that's a very good description of, you know what, there's cells that were dead. Okay, there was nothing we can do about those. This individual never had surgery. Those dead cells fell off. There were cells that were fine. I didn't see any in this picture that were fine, but there was a whole bunch that were functional but not functioning. And here we see them all functioning. So let's say that this is that individual's brain. Well, they might not remember their name or even their children's name. Here they remember a lot of things. Here they remember most things in their life, maybe just a few memories of childhood they don't have. And that's the hope. You know, if there's cells that are functional but not functioning, let's bring them back to life. And insulin regulation is a very important part of that.
Beautiful. I see there was another question there as well in regards to type 1. What products do you feel would work best for a type 1 diabetic who's a teenage boy? Spores?
Sure, that's going to be the starting point for sure. But understand that long-term health is really dependent upon long-term blood sugar control. You can have type 1 diabetes be well controlled and not kill the cells of the body. So Eric, I'm going to share some hope for everybody, because that's one of my favorite things to do is add hope. And years ago,
right now, Dr. Bob.
What's that?
It's on my mug right now as I'm sipping away here.
So one thing that I tell people is I was on a plane years ago, and I sat next to a guy, and he says, you know, I asked him what he did, and he said, well, I'm into organ regeneration. And I said, well, tell me about that. He says, well, what we've found that we can do is we can take the liver from a pig and we can digest out all the cells and all the genetic material, and we can infuse it with stem cells, and we can actually get it to start working. And that was in the animal model in the study. Well, now they even have those studies going on with hearts. Now, I'll tell you that the pancreas is very complex, but you'll notice that a pig heart looks like a human heart, and it's about the same size. This is a pig heart where the genetic material and the cells have been dissolved. And when they infuse stem cells, it can take over. But what I tell people is it's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And possibly the best strategy we have across the board to stay out of trouble is, you know, all things health, with reishi being the top thing to do, being the immune modulator, being a detoxification agent, being something that can prevent autoimmune disease, something that can enhance insulin signaling, something that can dissolve amyloid plaque. And when we start looking, you know, there's certainly a place for medicine, but it's not the first place. You know, the first place is stay healthy. If you get into trouble, the guidelines for medicine is use the lowest dose for the shortest duration. But sadly, people are, you know, often told that they need a lifetime of medication once they're diagnosed with diabetes. And most of the time we can make that go away without medication in 60 days.
That's awesome. So, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of Reishi Ganoderma out there. What makes what we have so unique with its potency that we can kind of stand above the competition, if you would call it that?
Well, I'm going to share a couple of things in terms of that, Eric. So first and foremost, we have more quality certifications with our reishi than any product I've ever seen in the world. And I've lectured for the top nutrition companies on the planet. And so most companies that have reishi, they actually grow it in a plastic bag. And so I don't know if you're seeing my application or not. Let's go back. this, share screen. Here we go. So when we start looking at it, we have USDA certified organic reishi grown in the most natural, pristine environment. And what I tell people is, sick animals don't reproduce, sick plants don't reproduce. You look at most reishi companies, they don't have spores. And the reason they don't have spores is their plants are not healthy enough to produce spores. Then you start looking at all of our quality certifications. We have two different patents. We have a patent by which we extract the nutrients from the spores and we get 99.9% nutrient bioavailability. The next closest competitor was 15%. Then we have a patent by which we put it in coffee and tea where we alkalize the coffee beforehand, and that's going to maximize the efficiency of everything within it. So Eric, we're getting to a place where in my timing, I need to wind down because I have a podcast coming up fairly quick.
Sure.
So in our way of wrapping up, what final message do you want to leave our wonderful partners and viewers?
Sure. I actually have a question that one person asked me off of the call. If you could address that, if that's okay.
Awesome.
I have a lady who has a hiatal hernia for over 15 years, but lately it's gotten particularly bad. More than once a week. She's kind of grieving at the minute, which has kind of brought that on even more so. So acid reflux is pretty bad. Just wondering what do you think would be a good option for that lady as well?
Well, what I tell people is that we have the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscle that separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. And there's a hole for blood to come from, for food to swallow or blood from the heart, multiple holes in the diaphragm that they call esophageal hiatus. So if the stomach bulges up through a hole in the diaphragm, I'm trying to figure out how to put my hands right, they call that a hiatal hernia. So a good practitioner can actually pull that down. Now, we know that hydrochloric acid actually maintains tone of something known as the esophageal sphincter, and these people tend to be low. So there's different herbs like gentian that can enhance hydrochloric acid. They can also get an over-the-counter hydrochloric acid supplement, but you want to pull it down. You want to keep it down. I was lecturing in Los Angeles. It seems like it was about 20 years ago, and I actually had a NASA flight surgeon in the audience. And he said, you know what, with those G-forces, the pilots would often have hiatal hernias. So he would teach them to drink as much water as they possibly could, really fill up their stomach, and then bounce hard off of their heels to try to pull down their own hiatal hernia. In theory, you could reach under your own sternum and attempt to pull it down. That's hard to do because you start pushing in, your stomach, your protective muscles are going to tense up. But in theory, it's still possible.
Wow. Just that one last thing before you do shoot as well, Dr. Bob. We had a couple of people who weren't able to share on the call today. Zaf has a team member's brother who had a big challenge, Tony. Zaf, I was just wondering, could you share if you have Tony's before and after? And I'll prepare you guys for this. This is not for the faint at heart. But could you just touch on what's going on here, Dr. Bob? This is, I think, over a month period of time. Is that right, Zaf?
Hey, Mr. Eric, no, I think it was a 2.5 week period.
Right.
Yeah, and so that looks very, very similar to the foot that I showed you. So, gangrene is settling in, an advanced diabetic. I think they were talking about amputation. And then you look forward and you'll see, a very remarkable healing. And then, most of the people in medicine that I'm aware of, they can't even imagine that's possible. And with their, with what they typically use, they're trained that no, it's not possible. That's why you cut off the foot. But bodies want to heal, and if we give it what it needs, it absolutely can heal.
That's beautiful. And that was spores, I believe, Zaf, that you managed, or your mom managed to get to Tony, I believe. So
100% correct. Yeah, he had 10 spores a day. So it just shows, if you take your health seriously, it can change.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I know Dr. Bob's time is limited today, so we're going to leave it there, guys. So grateful to have you on again, Dr. Bob. Let yourself recharge for your podcast. Looking forward to seeing you this Saturday as well, guys. We will be talking more about the business end of things as well. And then the following Tuesday, we will be revisiting another health topic. We will let you guys know what that is tomorrow. We have it scheduled. I just need to double check what that actually is. So guys, without further ado, thank you so much for coming on this evening. If we didn't get to any questions, I don't see any more in the question box, but
Eric.
Oh, Pete's in the house. Hey, Pete.
Eric, no, I just wanted to say first off, happy birthday to you, my friend. Or just to, Dr. Bob, I just wanted to let you know I'm wearing this blood sugar sensor that is teed up to my phone. So I've just been really curious just to see how, what I eat, how that affects my blood sugar level. And it probably won't surprise you, but the both times I drank black coffee today, my blood sugar level dropped. It dropped from about 5 to 4.6 twice. I wasn't expecting that, but it's just amazing. You see this thing unfolding in front of you. You see the reality of the impact of Ganoderma on the human body. So there's no question. I've seen this happen for so many people with diabetic challenges, the impact this can have. So just once again, I just want to thank you for, giving us your time and your wisdom, because, it's no surprise that there are a number of studies on this on PubMed, because Ganoderma really, really works. So thank you so much, once again, for your time.
You're very welcome all. Pete, truly remarkable. You're a seeker and a finder and a sharer. I love and appreciate that about you, and happy, beautiful birthday, Eric. I wish my birthday wishes early. So I know I did that a few days ago, but always good on your day as well. So I'm going to get running because I've got a next podcast going, but I appreciate all of you, and we'll see you Saturday.
Go and smash it, Dr. Bob. Thank you guys. Have an amazing evening. Ciao, guys. Good night.